young people are quite fascinating though. My kids are really they're not into sport, which is hard.
Hurts your heart.
I just it hurts well, it took me a few years, but I got to, like, as in not just into, hate it.
Uh,
So I was one of those kids that did everything, represented New Zealand in athletics, and so at the first athletics day years ago now, I took the handy cam along because I was like, this is the moment where my girls are just gonna start this race and the whole school is going to be like, wow. And they got last and second to last. And that's fine. That would have been fine, but there was no hunger. There was the jog across the line or the walk across the line, the looking around, and that is what hurt. And it sort of hasn't, nothing's changed. And just a great example of just because you birth these children doesn't mean they're your mini-me's, does it? So what they are into is social justice.
all right.
They are, like LGBTQ rights, Black Lives Matter, just all of them, all the people being able to be authentic to themselves, especially Tandy, one of the twins. And yeah, they're sort of in that kind of alternative-y sort of, so that makes me really proud. And a lot of their time on their phones is kind of researching that and on little, chats with people about that. And they've taught me a lot about gender and the different, many different categories now, and pronouns and all that sort of stuff.
I find it a really interesting conversation around those sorts of things. And what I try and do, being a former kind of talkback host and fairly opinionated person, is I try and give my kids the both perspectives on an issue that might be a, societal, conflict at the moment. Like, be it a gender issue or be it a race issue, or you don't really have conflict on race issues, but gender's certainly one at the moment that there's still debate in society over. And I'll say, well, these guys think this and these guys think this, and this is why they think this and this is why they think this, and then just kind of go, now go. So I have great conversations with my older ones as well, have in the past and continue to do so about that kind of stuff, because it's all just so normal. It's a normal conversation to have. And I was talking to a comedian yesterday, and we talked about not this exact issue, but the idea of that old saying of, if you're not liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. And that's been a kind of belief or a statement for a long time, but it's wrong. What it is rather than saying you have to be conservative when you're old, what it is actually we are more conservative than every generation after us. So the boomers were more conservative than the Gen Xers. Yeah. So to the Gen Xers, the boomers look conservative. To the Gen Ys, I'm Gen X. Gen Ys, the Gen Xers look conservative, even though I'm very progressive and liberal in my politics sort of thing. But to the Gen Ys, I look like a boomer, like a conservative boomer. And the Gen Zs are going to be more liberal than the millennials, than the Gen Ys. And so it's that there's this sliding scale of, being less liberal or being more conservative than the previous generation is what it is.
Yeah. I try to say to my girls, because they're quite tough on me for not remembering, a couple of their friends are now non-binary. So that's cool, but I am not always going to remember to say they instead of she.
Yep.
It's really hard for, this is all new to our generation, and it's not going to come as easy. And they get a bit frustrated with me. And Tandy said, it's okay to get it wrong, but you have to correct yourself immediately. And it's like, I am so open, and, this friend could be whatever, but do they want me to have this added pressure? Like, I'll do the best I can, is that what this is about?
There is and this is not a criticism of millennials or Gen Zs, which would be your kids and probably my kids as well, is that there is, and this is what happens as you get younger, an element of militancy with it as well. And that's why I try and have a broad perspective conversation with my kids and say, Like one of the things I said the other day about the pronouns, which I don't think many people have heard this point before. I'm not saying I've got a massive insight, but I've said this to a few people, including a gender studies professor, and he went, is the insistence of the pronouns is interesting because you don't use pronouns when you're talking to someone. You use these pronouns when you're talking about someone.
Yes.
So if someone wants to be a they, fine, that's the case. But what they're actually saying is, you need to talk about me when I'm not here in the way that I want. Because when they're in front of you, like if little Jimmy was a they, you don't go, how are they? You go, how are you?
Yeah.
So the only time you really use they is when you're talking about them, not to them. And I think it's an interesting dynamic, and I don't have necessarily a pro or a con against it, but this is the broad conversation.
Right, but it's just an interesting point that you bring up.
That little Jimmy is saying, when you talk about me when I'm not here, I want to control how you talk about me when I'm not here. It's just an interesting little twist.
Yeah. Well, it's all really boils down to the English language too, because if you're, Japanese and Chinese, and there's no she or he in that language, and so there's no problem. You don't have everyone is just a they or a, oh God, it's been so long now to think about it. But I don't know. It just seems to be constructs that, is it that important, the pronoun? It is obviously, or they wouldn't be made a big deal of, but I don't know.
But that point about these pronouns that are being picked, fine, you can call it whatever you want. I don't give a crap, fine, and I'll respect what you want to do. But it's got nothing to do with an interpersonal relationship. It's not a first person relationship. It's a second or third person relationship. It's when you're talking about people. I think that's really interesting. And you're right, it's about the English language, because I know in America at the moment there is the Latino community have obviously Latino and Latina for male and female. There is a group of particular people who are trying to get Latinx as a part of the vernacular, meaning non-binary.
Yeah, I wondered what that was.
And the Latino community have gone, no. And they're just outright, like, if you're within the community, they've basically said no to it. And it's people outside the community who are trying to build the Latinx word. So it's not that every change in society starts with a revolution, and good changes and good revolutions turn to good new societies. This may be this probably is this, I don't know, we'll see in the future, but I like having a broad conversation about it and thinking all the issues through, rather than going, that's definitely what we're going to do from now.
Yeah, and I wonder who it is that decides these things too, because it seems to me that they've, it was interesting that the Latino community said no to the Latinx, but often it's, how do these things become law? Well,
that's one of the problems, I think, with this conversation, is trying to bring in laws about it. That's not how society works. We choose as a society to make a word mean what it means. I mean, like the word gay, for example, not because we're talking about LGBT issues, but because it was the first one that came to mind. In the 1930s, it meant happy. Then society has decided, no one went, right, from this day forward, this is going to mean something different. But it's evolved, and all of society has chosen and agreed to take it on board. That's how words change. Words don't change from people saying, from now on, you must say this. And that's where I think the conflict sometimes comes up with this particular conversation.
Yeah, and it also seems to be changing so quickly that it's like, whoa, I just can't keep up. But look, the positive about all this is that our kids are able to not necessarily be in this box. There's other boxes. Hopefully there's not too many boxes to choose from, but that is about, in the end, being able to express themselves and be true to who they feel they are. Yeah,
and you think about what you rallied against your parents and the different positions you had and they had for their parents, once Elvis Presley came along, and the difference that music made to the generation before. It's every generation. So I see nothing but positivity from this. From the way kids are thinking these days. What's going to be interesting is what that leads to in society, because it could be positive, and I hope it is, and I suspect it will be, but we're not there yet, so it could also have detrimental impact. That's what has to wait and see.
Yeah. But at least I think for my kids they're great readers, my kids. They're always reading, not into sport, there's a lot of stuff they're not into. So just the fact that they're passionate about this is exciting for me.
Totally.
And about all the, I just think
It's also
to care about how, people's rights and feelings and
well, that's the basis of it. The basis of is caring for this community, looking after this community, even if you're not a part of it, and wanting this community to be treated well. I think that's admirable, and who wouldn't support that? And there's also that adage that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And these guys are standing for this at the moment. So